No matter how common a symptom may be, it is never normal, right? It is always the body's check engine light coming
Mhm.
on. And sadly, too often we take something over the counter, which is like putting a piece of tape over that
Yeah.
check engine light, and then things just keep getting worse and worse and worse until we're left with, these situations that they're out of control. We don't know how to deal with them. So pay attention to those symptoms, one, and two, keep digging. And if you don't get the answers, like so many people, I've already been to 20 or 30 different practitioners. What are you going to teach me that I haven't already learned? Yeah, I went through the same thing. And it was that last person, right, with a twinkle in her eye. I was in her office for a total of 5 minutes before she diagnosed me with Lyme disease, who I'd never heard this before, who finally could help me put the answers together.
Welcome to the Soaring Child podcast, where parents of children with ADHD learn tips and tricks to help their child soar at home, at school, and in life. We feature interviews with experts, medical professionals, and parents just like you who are learning how to reduce ADHD symptoms using food and other natural strategies. Because children with ADHD deserve to soar just like every other child. I'm Dana Kay, your host. Hello, parents. This is Dana Kay here with another edition of the Soaring Child podcast. Now, as many of you who follow me, you're aware that my son's ADHD diagnosis happened around the age of 4, and it came after an exhaustive and costly series of evaluations with a neurodevelopmental psychiatrist. And like so many others, and those listening today, we were quickly ushered down that path of medication because I was under the impression that ADHD had a singular cause and that pharmaceuticals were the sole solution for it. And this belief is not uncommon. In all the families that I've worked with, I've found that many are unaware of the diverse origins of ADHD. And it's really crucial to sort of recognize this complexity before making any treatment decisions. ADHD symptoms don't emerge in this vacuum, and they often have underlying causes and hidden stressors, sometimes multiple, that really need to be addressed. And without tackling these root issues, families find themselves stuck on an endless roller coaster of symptom management, which is where we were so many years ago. And one such overlooked cause could be something called Lyme disease. It's known for this like elusive nature of broad range of symptoms, including some of those that might mimic or exacerbate ADHD. So understanding this connection could be a piece of the puzzle for many. And so I am offering this new avenue that families can explore, really to get that relief and a reminder that the journey to understand ADHD, it's multifaceted and the solutions are varied. So today I have the perfect guest to chat on this exact topic. I want you all to meet Heather Gray. She's a functional diagnostic nutritionist and bioenergetic practitioner specializing in supporting people with chronic and complex illnesses such as Lyme disease and similar diseases. She's actually got 32 years of personal experience, and she understands the struggles of living with these conditions, and it's dedicated to helping others find that relief as well. Really focusing on that personalized approach as a practitioner. She's also a podcast host. She's also an author, and she's helped countless people reduce that inflammation in the body, in the brain, improve gut health, and really achieve that wellness. So now it's time to welcome Heather Gray to the Soaring Child. Hi, Heather. Thanks so much for joining us today.
What's happening? Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's so great to have you here. Look, most of the listeners know that my journey was originally born out of a personal necessity and sort of like this deep desire to get off that emotional roller coaster and find what that best solution for my family was when we were really struggling, it's a very common, topic. It's a common approach among health practitioners. Heather, can you maybe begin by explaining your personal journey with chronic illness and how it led to this specialty?
No, absolutely. I mean, I've done over 100 episodes myself, and I haven't met one not one alternative practitioner that didn't have a personal story tied to their healing journey.
Wow.
Like it's just a commonality that takes us off that brainwashed, right, Western medicine that we've just been conditioned for so long. It takes a bit to get bumped off that road, and it's usually that personal story. Mine was no different. I usually start at the beginning where I was basically born full of shit, right? Like
Oh,
how many of you can relate to being constipated at a very early age? I
yes.
remember sitting on the potty for so long that my feet would fall asleep, and that was like my first experience with let's throw band-aids at symptoms.
Yeah.
Let's give her thick, nasty oils and stool softeners, but not try to figure out why this 4-year-old was constipated.
Mm-hmm.
Hindsight's 2020. My uncle had committed suicide that year.
Oh,
It
I'm sorry.
set off some early childhood trauma. I think it pretty much kicked off my celiac disease gene, and then I was eating a standard American diet. So
Mm-hmm.
by the time I was 13 and I got bit by a tick, I was a perfect host, right? So many folks think, you know, this happened, then this happened, cause A, cause B. And it's usually not. Usually there's these processes that have been in place for years, if not decades, before symptoms actually start showing up. And so I have, funky detox genes. When people say their detox bucket, I actually have a detox thimble. So
Mm-hmm.
it didn't take much for it to get overloaded. I had a lot of early childhood trauma being raised by addicts, the suicide, and then funky genes and celiac disease. And so, like I said, I was leaky gut, leaky brain.
Perfect
I was
storm.
perfect storm. I was living in a moldy house.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so when I got bit by a tick at 13, like I said, perfect host for that critter to come along. And one like PSA when talking about Lyme disease, and you did a great job. Some people still say Lyme's disease and never,
Oh.
ever, never, ever say Lyme's disease. It's only ever Lyme disease. It's not named after a person, it's named after a place, and that's the difference. And anybody who's been in the world for a while, in the Lyme disease world, you'll literally watch their head explode if you say Lyme's disease. So just a PSA for your listeners.
There you go. So yeah, so you got bit by a tick, and so how did you end up, getting into this natural realm? Did you go down the traditional path to try and time to get wellness? What led you to getting into this more of this holistic natural approach?
So 13 years old, bit by a tick, didn't develop symptoms really till about 2 years later when I ended up in the psych ward for the first time for a suicide attempt.
Oh
So
my
same
goodness.
thing. No one's trying to figure out why this 15-year-old was trying to off herself. They just put me on antipsychotics, antidepressants, told me I was attention seeking, pat me on the head, sent me out the door, right?
Mm.
So again, more band-aids thrown at symptoms type stuff. I mean, there was a time in my life I remember carrying around a box of Gas X in my purse, a box of Gas X in my car and in my locker at work because my gut never worked and it was an embarrassing side effect, right? So I
Mhm.
was just used to those over the counter. But anywho, fast forward, I'm 34 years old now. My kid is around 9, and I've been struggling greatly through those years, multiple suicide attempts,
Mm.
if not a lot of anxiety, depression,
Yeah.
chronic widespread pain. Lyme disease is the great mimicker. So it's a spiral-shaped spirochete that is in the same family as syphilis. And if you know anything about syphilis, it used to, make people go mad, right? So it really caused a lot of brain swelling, a lot of inflammation in the brain. So they call it the great mimicker because its corkscrew shape, it can invade any tissue, any system, any organ in the body and slowly start to shut things down. And it never usually comes by itself. Usually it's got a couple co-infections, Bartonella, Babesia along with it, maybe some other viruses like Epstein-Barr, mycoplasma, lots of other little fun critters that just make this perfect cocktail that looks like fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue or ADHD or what did I get diagnosed with? Bipolar, MS. There's a huge percentage of MS and Alzheimer's patients that are actually misdiagnosed Lyme disease. So it is the great mimicker, and it's sad because one of the telltale signs is it's got migrating pain. And so there's only like 6 diseases and all the diseases out there that actually have migrating pain as a symptom. And it's weird. It's like one day it's your right shoulder and the next day it's your left elbow and then it's your right knee and then it's your left hip. And So people look at you like you're a hypochondriac, right? Because they already think you're crazy to begin with because you have brain inflammation and you're not, working properly. But now you've got this mysterious migrating pain. So that's always like you hear somebody talk about migrating pain, think Lyme disease.
Okay. Okay. Is that one of the telltale signs?
Well, I mean, because there's so many different signs that can happen, and everybody is so different. There's not a whole lot of telltale, but usually like extreme fatigue, brain fog, um, chronic pain, and joint pain. Joint pain, especially because it likes to eat collagen, and so it'll um, accumulate in your joints. And that's
Mm.
why a lot of people get a lot of joint pain with Lyme disease.
So,
And so, yes, go ahead.
I was just going to say, okay, so, Lyme disease comes from a tick bite, but what's the process of it actually forming into Lyme disease? Does it, if you don't get rid of the tick, or is it the venom from the tick? What is it? What is Lyme disease? How does it sort of form?
So not just a tick, it's a tick, mosquito, any blood, born carrying insect, right? If you think about it. So mosquito, fleas, ticks, it can be sexually transmitted and it can be congenitally transmitted.
Wow.
So that was a big fear of mine when I learned that. And I know I passed that along down to my kid because
Mhm.
I didn't get diagnosed until my kid was 9. And he's definitely had ADHD type symptoms and some health issues of his own that went for a long time undiagnosed. And I think it was the undiagnosed Lyme disease.
Wow.
But it's so there's a lot of misnomers out there, that it has to be attached for so long before you transmit Lyme disease. That's actually a misnomer. Certain different species can actually transmit things faster than others. Granted, obviously, if it is attached longer, your chances are higher.
Mhm.
The way you take it out, so like my mom put a lighter to it. That was like in the old school way of doing it, and we're finding out now that it actually makes it regurgitate what's in its system. You're scaring it, and so your chances of getting it are higher. I did get a bullseye rash, and that's another misnomer. Most people think, oh, you get a bullseye rash. Only 30% of people with Lyme disease actually will get that bullseye. Now, if you get that bullseye, you better get your butt in there and get on something ASAP because that is a telltale sign. But there's a lot of us like myself who actually didn't get the bullseye rash. So yeah, that's kind of how it can get transmuted. Um,
And then so, like, you then usually, if it does get, transmitted, how long does it usually take to start exhibiting symptoms, or does it depend on the host, like what you mentioned earlier in your story?
110%. Otherwise, everybody who gets bit by a tick or a mosquito would get Lyme disease. But most of us, a lot of people don't because their immune system is strong and robust, and or their genetics are a heck of a lot better than mine. Like
Yeah.
I really got the broken end of that stick, the genetic lottery. I said for a long time, even before I knew this stuff, that my parents really should never have bred because just genetically they're just not sound people. And
Mm.
the
Mm.
kids, yeah, the kids suffered for it.
Yeah.
Um,
Sure.
but yeah, so it just depends. Like I said, your stress level, what you're eating, what kind of shape your gut's in, your genetic detox bucket. There's lots and lots of components that go into who gets it and who doesn't. And also it depends on what other little critters concoction that you got into that needle um, as well. So yeah, there's a lot of different factors that take
Yeah.
into play.
Wow, it's a really, really complex thing. So, we've touched on a few different symptoms here, but what are some of the symptoms of Lyme disease, especially in children, that parents should be sort of looking out for?
Cognitive issues,
Mm.
cognitive behavioral issues, and gut issues. It really likes to attack the gut and the brain. And then, like I said, joints. So, like when I was younger, my right knee would swell up something fierce for like no reason. Lyme knee, it's called Lyme knee.
Lyme.
There's also something called Lyme rage, which, I used to have full on flipping meltdowns on a regular basis. a lot of forgetfulness, a lot of attention, ADD type symptoms. I used to get told all the time, great student, but talks too much, great student, but gets distracted easily, great student. But, even today, I have a hard time with focus. Like if I need to get down and do something, you'll hear me tell myself, focus, focus, because it just, the cognitive stuff is just huge, especially in kids.
Well, there you go. I mean, and this could be one of those underlying stresses for families listening out today. So, I think that, when you learn this information, it can be very empowering to dig deeper. In your extensive experience, have you sort of found Lyme disease to be sort of a contributing factor to those neurological symptoms, including those associated with ADHD? It sounds like it is.
Oh, absolutely. Lyme, mold, food sensitivities, grains and dairy, those are usually like the top 4 when it comes to any kind of behavioral things with kids these days. And it's so sad to watch parents, they're doing the best they can with the tools they have. And sadly, they don't have the correct tools. And so these kids are being punished, for behavioral issues or something that they can't help. It used to kill me because, like, when I was 13, shortly after, I guess before I went to the psych ward, I was in anger management control classes because I couldn't process my anger properly. A lot to do with that Lyme disease and being inflamed, right? And people, all my whole life, I would get in trouble. Well, just count to 10, just take a breath, and I'm like, you don't realize that there is no buffer. There is what happens and my reaction. And I can't even count how many times I've been reprimanded, scolded, been made to feel like a freaking idiot, like an out of control feral person, who couldn't control themselves, when really it was an inflamed brain and Lyme disease, mold toxicity, and, celiac disease this whole time,
I know. And this is why I love guests like you. This is why I love this podcast, because we are sort of opening up that curtain to say, and families have heard me say it multiple times, when your child is melting down multiple times, a day or every day of the week, that is not normal. That is a warning sign that something else in the body is going on. It is telling you, Mom, Dad, get me checked out. There's something going on in my body that needs to be sorted. Okay, so you finally got diagnosed with Lyme disease. What does this
I know where you're going at next. That's a fun part of the story too.
Yeah.
So it's funny. I have a book that's going to come out this year, and the title's going to be, I Told You I'm Not Crazy, The Realities of Lyme Disease, because that's when I finally got diagnosed. That's what I was screaming, tears running down my face. I'm driving 65 miles an hour down I-25 in Colorado. I screamed at the top of my lungs, I told you I'm not crazy, right? Because my whole freaking life I was dismissed. I had that stigma. I had that label tapped to me. And I was anything, if anybody who knows me knows I am actually anything but crazy. I'm very logic. I'm very sane. I'm very down to earth. Anywho, but so I went the traditional route at first because I didn't know any better, right? Yeah. So here I'm going to a doctor who is throwing napalm at a body that's been sick for decades. Mm-hmm. I told you I didn't poop when I was growing up, and that had never changed. So now we have a person who's not pooping, not sleeping, under stress, crappy diet. Doctor didn't ask me about any of these things before he started to go to war with my body.
Yep.
I thought I was going to die. It scared the living crap out of me. And so very quickly, I took a step back and went, okay, we're going to figure something else out here. And that's actually when I heard the founder of FDN, Reed Davis, on a podcast, speaking to Sean Croxton of Underground Wellness about, you got to make sure that the gut's working right. And you got to make sure the detox pathways are open and are the hormones balanced, all the things that functional diagnostic nutrition does. And I was a hairstylist at the time. I didn't have a medical background, but intuitively I just knew at that time that program was like $1,500. Like now it's $8,000.
Yeah.
And I remember I begged my ex-husband at the time to let me go through it, because when you go through it, you get to do a couple labs on yourself, right? You get to be your own guinea pig. and I found out not only did I have Lyme, but I had blastocystis hominis. It's a common,
Parasite, for those that don't know what that
parasite
is. Yes.
for people who have pets, right? I've always had a lot of animals, and I would eat and I would bloat like Violet off of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Like I would wait for an Oompa Loompa to come roll me away, after I ate. And my liver was congested, and my hormones, man, my hormones were in the dirt. Like it was a no wonder that I didn't function.
Yeah.
So what a blessing it was. 34 years old. What
Mm-hmm.
a blessing it was to finally have a piece of paper and say, you know what?
You're not crazy.
There was nothing wrong with me. I mean, there was something wrong with me, but there wasn't nothing wrong with me in the way that I was made to feel my whole entire life. So,
Wow.
no, and it is, and so yeah. So then I went the FDN route and started peeling back the layers, and that was back in 2013. And yeah, I'm still peeling back layers. Like it's still a
Because
fascinating
it's
to be.
been there for so long. It's so deep. It's so, and I assume that when you know you might have got bitten by a tick back then, but the dysfunction creates more dysfunction, which creates more dysfunction, and so all of those layers that have got to keep going. It's a journey. So, what does a holistic approach to like going for Lyme disease involve? How does it differ from those conventional treatments?
Oh, absolutely. And even differ than just the functional route, because I found, right, it's a multi-pronged approach, and not one area has all the answers. And it breaks my heart because I still see so many people put so much hope, especially in like LLMDs, which is Lyme literate medical doctors, which is going to be a step above than your regular doctors, because a lot of them still don't believe in chronic Lyme. Do you realize that the CDC just recognized chronic Lyme disease as a disease for the first time last year? The
Wow.
disease that I've had my whole entire life just got recognized by the CDC last year.
Well, can I just say there's two ways you could go with that. Let's just go the positive way to go, yay. Finally, the CDC actually did something right. But let's not go on that tangent, because the CDC, that's a story for a whole nother day. It's kind of like the FDA.
Oh, God.
But I am
Yeah.
so glad that they have, because, the fact that is now recognized must, just take a weight off your shoulders in a way. But I mean, I know the diagnosis of Lyme disease back in there probably just that lifted it all for you. So sorry, I completely went on a tangent there, and that's what I tend to do a lot of the time. So yes, let's talk about the holistic approach to
So yeah, I'm doing the FDN thing, and about 6 months later, my life is almost completely changed. Except I kept hitting a wall. Now I've plateaued, and we got to dig a little deeper. Turned out I was living in mold, and I had been living in mold for quite so many years, and I don't have the detox genes. So that was another layer that we healed to peel back. Then I found out I had cavitations, which if you get your wisdom teeth or root canal done and they don't do it properly by a biological dentist, you get infection trapped into your jawbone. And if you think about it, it's such a vascular area, and it's so close to the brain that it really scatters your troops. If your troops are dealing with this low level infection all the time, it has a really tough time putting things like COVID and Lyme and Epstein-Barr in its place, because it's dealing with this. So had to have $10,000 worth of surgery done to get that cleaned up. And then the last little piece was trauma, right? I talked to you about what it was like when I grew up, that kind of addicts, the suicide. So that was stuck in my nervous system, along with chronic disease, heavy metals. And so I was a person who was always stuck in fight or flight.
Yeah.
And so I kept relapsing. And it breaks my heart, because I've talked to so many people with autoimmune and Lyme, and they just talk about having flares, like it's a normal part of the disease. But you don't have to have the flares, right? If you address all the different areas that need to be addressed, including the nervous system resetting, the mindfulness, the, that part of it, the getting out of fight or flight. And so, not only am I an FDN, then I've also been a trauma, informed person. I've done the mindset retraining, all the things that I had to learn how to do to get better. I, then became, so, usually, like I said, a one person approach. And if they're just going to like hit you with supplements or hit you with a prescription, it's not gonna be the whole picture, and you end up having to go back and dig deeper.
Definitely. And that's exactly what we preach and teach here on the Soaring Child podcast. Wow, Heather, what a journey you have gone through. But I really think that it sort of just, sheds light that, families need to look at what could be underlying contributing to these symptoms. And it sounds like you had a lot of those neurological symptoms. What advice would you give to parents or even, just individuals who might be listening to the podcast who suspect that Lyme disease might be playing a role in their or their child's ADHD symptoms?
Just like you were saying, no matter how common a symptom may be, it is never normal, right? It is always the body's check engine light coming on. And sadly, too often we take something over the counter, which is like putting a piece of tape over that check engine light. And then things just keep getting worse and worse and worse until we're left with, these situations that they're out of control. And we don't know how to deal with them. So pay attention to those symptoms, one, and two, keep digging. And if you don't get the answers, like so many people, I've already been to 20 or 30 different practitioners. What are you going to teach me that I haven't already learned? Yeah, I went through the same thing. And it was that last person, right, with a twinkle in her eye. I was in her office for a total of 5 minutes before she diagnosed me with Lyme disease, who I'd never heard this before, who finally could help me put the answers together. Thank God for those 20 other practitioners before, because I look at it as a what's the word I'm looking for? Getting rid of things. Next, it's not that, right?
Yes.
Next, process of
elimination. Yes.
Yeah. Next, it wasn't that. Okay,
Yes.
cool. Thank you. It wasn't that. So to never give up. And then, if you look, if you're, wondering, there's all kinds of awesome quizzes. I have one on my website, of a Horowitz quiz of, is it Lyme disease?
Yeah.
So that you can kind of look at symptoms and see, is that this, it's just one more thing to rule out.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that that's a great way to end up. Never give up. Okay. Keep asking questions, peel away the layers. Heather, fantastic episode. Thank you so much for joining me and sharing this amazing story, sharing your knowledge, your experience with all our listeners today. Please tell listeners where they can find and follow you online.
TheLymeBoss.com. That's LYME, not LIME. We're not making margaritas. But yeah,
I'd love to make a margarita.
Maybe if it's virgin, like the brain fog, I can't do alcohol anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Lyme Boss everywhere, from the podcast to the website to social, all the places.
Heather Gray, thank you once again for joining me today. Listeners, thank you for tuning into this week's episode of The Soaring Child. I'm Dana Kay, your ADHD health practitioner. Keep on thriving. Thank you for listening to the Soaring Child podcast today. To learn more about how to help your child with ADHD soar using natural strategies, visit our website at ADHDthriveinstitute.com and follow us on social media at ADHD Thrive Institute.